The restaurant was filled with laughter, until a harsh voice cut through the air. "Clean it with your tongue," the manager shouted. Three young sisters, triplets, stood frozen, their eyes glistening with tears as everyone stared. They had done nothing but try to survive another day. But in that crowd sat a man no one recognized, a man whose heart broke at the sight before him. He was a billionaire, one who had once known pain, hunger, and humiliation. And that day, when he saw the triplets being shamed, something inside him shattered. He didn't just see cleaners, he saw his past. And before the day ended, the world around them was about to change forever. Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Are you team early morning or late night story time? And how are you doing today, really? I hope you're taking care of yourself. Before we dive deep into the story, if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is built on stories that matter, stories about real people facing impossible choices. And I promise you, what happens next will break your heart before it heals it. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's experience this journey together. Now, let me take you back to that moment, the moment everything changed. The juice spilled in slow motion. Grace watched in horror as the red liquid spread across the pristine white floor, moving like blood toward the expensive shoes of the wealthy guests. Her heart stopped. Her hands shook. This was it. This was the moment everything would fall apart. "No, no, no," she whispered. Her sisters appeared instantly beside her. Hope grabbed a mop. Faith ran for towels. All three girls moved like they'd practiced for this exact disaster, because in a way they had. When you're poor and desperate, you learn to expect the worst. But they weren't fast enough. "What have you done?" The scream came from Mrs. Reynolds, one of the restaurant's wealthiest customers. She jumped from her chair like the juice was acid. Her face twisted with rage as she pointed at Grace. "You clumsy idiot! Look what you've done! Do you know how much my grandson's shoes cost?" Grace wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Around the restaurant, every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to watch. And Grace felt shame burn through her body like fire. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she stammered. "It was an accident. Please, I'll clean it up right away." "An accident?" Mrs. Reynolds' voice got louder. "You people always have excuses." You people. Those two words hung in the air like poison. Grace was 19 years old. So were her identical sisters, Hope and Faith. Triplets, three girls who looked exactly alike and shared everything, including their nightmare. Their mother was dying. Cancer. Stage 4. The kind where doctors shake their heads and talk about making her comfortable, instead of talking about cure. But there was treatment. Expensive treatment. Treatment that cost $15,000 every month. Treatment they could never, ever afford. So the three sisters worked. They worked at La Magnifique, the fanciest restaurant in the city, cleaning floors and bathrooms for people who wouldn't look at them twice. They worked 16-hour shifts, they skipped meals, they wore the same uniforms until the fabric wore thin. And still, they couldn't earn enough. Every night, they counted their money. Every night, they came up short. And every night, they watched their mother get weaker. This job was all they had. Losing it meant losing everything. And now, Grace had spilled juice. The manager appeared like a shark, smelling blood in the water. Gerald Reeves was a mean man who enjoyed being mean. He had cold eyes and a cruel mouth, and right now, both were focused on Grace. "You," he said, his voice quiet and deadly. "Come here." Grace's legs barely held her up as she walked toward him. Behind her, Hope and Faith followed, forming a protective wall around their sister. They always did that. Whatever happened to one happened to all three. "Mrs. Reynolds," Gerald said, his voice suddenly sweet as honey. "Please accept my deepest apologies. This girl is new, clearly unqualified. I will handle this immediately." "See that you do," Mrs. Reynolds sniffed, "or I'll be taking my business elsewhere." Gerald's face went red. Mrs. Reynolds was important. Mrs. Reynolds spent thousands of dollars here every month. Mrs. Reynolds could not be upset. He turned back to the triplets and his face changed. The fake sweetness disappeared. What replaced it made Grace's blood cold. Do you three have any idea what you've just done? His voice was low, but everyone could hear it. The whole restaurant was listening. And do you know how much business you've just cost this establishment? Sir, please. It was an accident. I'll clean it up. I'll work extra hours. You'll what? Gerald interrupted. Fix it? Make it better? You people never fix anything. You just make messes and expect others to clean them up. You people, again. Please, Faith whispered. We need this job. Our mother is sick. She needs medicine. We have nowhere else to go. Something flickered in Gerald's eyes, but it wasn't sympathy. It was opportunity. He saw their desperation, and it made him smile. Your mother is sick? He repeated, loud enough for everyone to hear. How touching. And you expect me to feel sorry for you? To keep paying you when you clearly can't do the job? We can, Hope said, her voice stronger than her sister's. We're good workers. This was just one mistake. Please, sir, give us another chance. Gerald looked around the restaurant. Every wealthy person was watching, waiting to see what he would do. And Gerald realized something. This was his moment, his chance to show everyone how tough he was, how he didn't tolerate mistakes, how he ran a tight ship. He smiled wider. You want another chance? He asked. Yes, sir, all three girls said together. You want to keep your jobs? Yes, sir, please. Then prove it. Gerald's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire silent restaurant. Get on your knees. The sisters looked at each other, confused and terrified. Excuse me? Grace asked. You heard me. Get on your knees. Gerald pointed at the spilled juice. And since you're so incompetent with a mop, clean that floor with your tongue. The restaurant went completely silent. Grace felt the world tilt. She couldn't have heard that right. He couldn't have just said, You want me to lick the floor? Her voice was tiny, broken. Unless you want to be unemployed, your choice. Lick it clean or get out. All three of you. Faith started to cry. Not loud sobbing, but quiet tears that ran down her cheeks like rain. Hope's hands clenched into fists, her whole body shaking with rage and helplessness. And Grace, she thought about their mother in the hospital bed, about the medicine they couldn't afford, about how they had no savings, no other options, nowhere else to turn. What choice did they have? Grace started to kneel, her knees bent, her body lowered toward the floor. And as she moved, she felt something break inside her, some last piece of dignity, some final scrap of self-respect. She was about to lick a floor like an animal, while rich people watched and judged and felt nothing. Her sisters kneeled beside her. If one did it, all three would. That's what being triplets meant. That's what being sisters meant. Grace's face was inches from the floor now. She could smell the juice, see the dirt, feel the eyes of every person in the restaurant burning into her back. She opened her mouth. Stop. The word was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a gunshot. Grace froze. Her sisters froze. Gerald froze. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. In the corner booth, a man stood up. Nobody had really noticed him before. He'd been sitting alone, reading a newspaper, drinking coffee. Just another customer. But now he was standing, and there was something about him that made everyone stop and stare. He wasn't very tall, he wasn't particularly handsome, but his eyes were bright with tears, and as he walked toward the triplets, those tears spilled down his cheeks. A grown man, crying, in public. Sir, Gerald started, trying to regain control. This is a staff matter. I appreciate your concern, but I said stop. The man's voice was still quiet, but there was steel in it now. Command. Power. Don't make them do that. I'm the manager here, Gerald said, his face going red again. I decide how to discipline my staff. This is none of your business. That's where you're wrong. The man reached the triplets. He looked down at them, 3 identical girls, on their knees, faces wet with tears, broken with humiliation, and more tears rolled down his face. Get up, he said gently to the sisters. Please, stand up. Grace didn't understand what was happening, but something in his voice made her obey. She stood. Her sister stood, and the crying man positioned himself between them and Gerald, like a shield. Who do you think you are? Gerald demanded, interrupting my management of, "My name is Dominic Zhang." The man's voice was steady now, despite his tears. 6 months ago, I bought this restaurant. The silence that followed was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop in the kitchen. Gerald's face went from red to white to gray. You're the owner? I am. Dominic wiped his eyes, but more tears kept coming. I bought Le Magnifique 6 months ago. Nobody knew who I was. I wanted it that way. I wanted to see how this place really operated when the owner wasn't watching. He turned to face the entire restaurant, his voice carrying to every corner. I came here today to observe, to understand the business I'd purchased. And do you know what I saw? His voice broke. I saw 3 young girls being humiliated for entertainment. I saw a man abuse his power because he could. I saw all of you, he gestured to the wealthy diners, watching it happen and doing nothing. Mrs. Reynolds looked down at her plate. Other diners suddenly found their napkins fascinating. These girls, Dominic continued, looking at the triplets, what are your names? Grace, she whispered. Hope, her sister added. Faith, the third finished. Grace, Hope, and Faith, Dominic repeated. Beautiful names. Tell me, why do you work here? The sisters looked at each other. Should they answer? Could they trust this crying stranger who claimed to own the restaurant? Grace decided to take a chance. What did they have to lose? Our mother has cancer, she said simply. The treatment costs $15,000 a month. We work to pay for her medicine. Dominic closed his eyes, fresh tears squeezed out. When he opened them again, he looked at Gerald with something that might have been hatred. You knew this? You knew their situation? Yes, but what does that... You knew they were desperate. You knew they had no choice. And you used that against them. Dominic's voice was shaking now. You were going to make 3 teenage girls lick a floor like dogs while their dying mother waits for medicine they can barely afford? And you thought that was acceptable? Sir, I was just maintaining standards. Standards? Dominic laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Let me tell you about standards, Gerald. Let me tell you a story. He turned back to the restaurant crowd. Everyone was listening now. Even the kitchen staff had creeped out to watch. My mother's name was Mei Zhang. She came to this country with nothing. She worked as a cleaner her entire life. 3 jobs, sometimes 4, all to raise me alone after my father left. His voice got quieter, forcing everyone to lean in to hear. When I was 8 years old, my mother and I walked past this restaurant. She looked at it with such wonder, such longing. She said, someday when you're successful and I'm a proper lady, we'll eat there together. You'll buy me the most expensive thing on the menu. Grace felt her heart break for the stranger and his mother. I promised her, Dominic continued. I promised that when I made money, when I became successful, I'd bring her here. We'd eat together. We'd celebrate. He paused, wiping his eyes. I kept that promise. I made money. I became successful. I made a reservation for her 65th birthday. The restaurant waited. Nobody breathed. She died 3 days before that reservation. Dominic's voice cracked completely. Heart attack. At work. She was cleaning an office building, on her knees scrubbing a floor, when her heart just stopped. She died on her knees, like you were about to make these girls do. Grace started crying again. So did her sisters. So did several people in the restaurant. But that's not the worst part, Dominic said. Want to know what the worst part is? Nobody answered. They were all crying too hard. The worst part is what happened 2 years before she died. She was cleaning an executive bathroom. A drunk businessman came in, saw her on her knees scrubbing, and he urinated on the floor, right next to where she was working. He told her to earn her paycheck. Gasps echoed through the restaurant. My mother came home that night and cried in my arms for hours, and I promised her that if I ever had power, if I ever had money, I would use it to protect people like her, people who work hard and get treated like they're invisible, people who do the jobs nobody else wants to do, people who deserve dignity,
but rarely get it. He turned to Gerald. "You're fired." Gerald's mouth fell open. "You can't." "I can. I just did. Security will escort you out. You'll be paid for today, but after this, you're done." "And Mr. Reeves?" His voice went cold. "I have a lot of friends in this industry. By tomorrow, every restaurant in this city will know what you did here today. Good luck finding another job." Gerald looked around desperately, like someone might help him. Nobody did. 2 security guards appeared and led him away. The man who was so powerful 5 minutes ago now looked small and scared. Good, Grace thought. Let him know how it feels. But Dominic wasn't finished. He turned to Mrs. Reynolds. "Madam, it was your grandson who spilled the juice originally, wasn't it?" Mrs. Reynolds' face went pale. "Well, yes, but these girls were cleaning up your family's mess, and you screamed at them, berated them, called them you people." Dominic's voice was ice. "You are no longer welcome in this restaurant. Your privileges are permanently revoked." "How dare you?" Mrs. Reynolds stood up. "I've been a customer here for years. I spend thousands." "I don't want your money," Dominic said simply. "This restaurant is built on the labor of every person who works here. If you can't treat them with basic respect, you can eat somewhere else." Mrs. Reynolds grabbed her designer purse and stormed out, her family scrambling after her. As they left, several other wealthy diners looked uncomfortable, like they were worried they might be next. "Let me be very clear," Dominic announced to everyone remaining. "This restaurant has new rules as of right now. Every employee will be treated with dignity. Anyone, customer or staff, who violates that rule will be removed. No exceptions." Then he turned to the triplets, and his whole face softened. "Grace, Hope, Faith, I need to ask you some questions. Is that okay?" They nodded, still too shocked to speak properly. "Your mother, what kind of cancer?" "Pancreatic, stage 4. And the doctors say that with treatment, she might have a year, maybe more, but without it..." Faith couldn't finish. "How much do you make here?" "Minimum wage. Between the 3 of us, about $2,000 a month after taxes." "And you need $15,000 monthly for treatment?" "Yes, sir." Dominic pulled out his phone. He typed quickly, then showed them the screen. "This is Dr. Sarah Patel. She's one of the best cancer doctors in the country. She's also my friend. I just texted her about your mother. She'll call you within the hour to arrange a transfer to Memorial Hospital. All costs will be billed to me." The triplets stared at him like he was speaking another language. "Sir, we can't..." Grace started. "You're not asking. I'm telling you." Dominic's voice was firm but kind. "Your mother will get the best treatment available. You 3 will no longer worry about paying for it. That's non-negotiable." "But why?" Faith whispered. "Why would you do this for strangers?" "Because someone should have done it for my mother," Dominic said simply. "And because you 3 remind me that there are good people in this world who deserve good things. You work hard. You love your mother. You were willing to endure humiliation rather than lose your ability to help her. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's courage. And it deserves to be rewarded." Hope started sobbing, loud, broken sobs of relief and disbelief. Grace grabbed her sister and held on tight. Faith joined them, and all 3 girls cried together while Dominic waited patiently. When they finally pulled themselves together, Dominic continued. "Now, here's what's going to happen next. You 3 are taking the week off, paid, to be with your mother, get her settled into treatment, be there for her. Then we're going to have a conversation about your futures." "Our futures?" Grace repeated. "Yes, because 19-year-olds shouldn't be destroying themselves as cleaners unless that's truly their passion. Tell me, if money wasn't an issue, if your mother was taken care of, what would you want to do with your lives?" The sisters looked at each other, having a silent conversation only triplets can have. "I want to be a nurse," Grace said quietly. "I want to help sick people. I want to study business," Hope added, "learn how to create opportunities for people. And I want to be a teacher," Faith finished, "help kids who don't have much, like us." Dominic smiled, the first real smile they'd seen from him. Then that's what you'll do. I'm creating a scholarship fund. It will cover full tuition, housing, books, everything you need. You three will be the first recipients. That's too much, Grace protested weakly. It's not enough, Dominic corrected, but it's a start. There is one condition, though. The sisters tensed. Here it comes, Grace thought. The catch. There's always a catch. During your summers and some weekends, I want you to work here. Not as cleaners, as management trainees. You'll learn how to run a restaurant properly, how to treat employees, how to build something that helps people instead of using them, and you'll be paid fairly for your time. Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're going to pay for our college and pay us to learn? Yes. Why? Faith asked again. This doesn't make sense. People don't just do this. Dominic's eyes filled with tears again. They should, he said. They absolutely should. And maybe if more people did, my mother would still be alive. Maybe she wouldn't have worked herself to death. Maybe she'd have gotten the help she needed instead of just enduring. He looked at each sister in turn. I can't save my mother, but I can save you three. I can give you the chance she never got, and maybe that makes her suffering mean something. Maybe it redeems all those years she spent on her knees scrubbing floors while people looked through her like she was invisible. The entire restaurant was crying now. Hardened businessmen wiped their eyes, wealthy women grabbed tissues, even the tough kitchen staff stood in the doorway with tears streaming down their faces. Grace felt something shift inside her, something broken, beginning to heal. She looked at this crying billionaire who'd appeared like a miracle in their darkest moment, and she understood something important. Kindness was real. Compassion existed. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the universe sent help exactly when you needed it most. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Dominic pulled all three sisters into a hug. They held onto him like drowning people grabbing a lifeline. And in that moment, in that fancy restaurant where they'd been about to lick a floor like animals, something beautiful happened. Hope was born. Real hope. The kind that changes everything. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Because what happened next, what happened over the following days and weeks and months, would change not just three girls' lives, but hundreds of lives, thousands of lives. The ripples from this single moment would spread farther than anyone could imagine. But first, they had to save their mother. Dr. Patel called 17 minutes later. Grace answered with shaking hands. Hello? Is this Grace Chen? The voice was warm and professional. Yes, ma'am. My name is Dr. Sarah Patel. Dominic Chang just contacted me about your mother. Tell me everything. For the next 20 minutes, Grace explained their mother's condition while her sisters listened on speakerphone. Dr. Patel asked detailed questions, took notes, and occasionally made sympathetic sounds. All right, she said finally. Here's what's going to happen next. I'm sending an ambulance to pick up your mother right now. We'll transfer her to Memorial Hospital tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'll personally evaluate her and start treatment immediately. Do not worry about cost. Do not worry about insurance. Do not worry about anything except being there for your mother. Understood? Yes, ma'am, all three sisters said together. Good. Dominic gave your mother's current location. The ambulance will be there in 30 minutes. I'll see you at the hospital. She hung up. The sisters looked at each other in stunned silence. Then they started laughing. Not funny laughter, but the kind that comes from being so scared for so long that suddenly not being scared feels impossible. Is this real? Did that actually just happen? I think so, but I keep waiting to wake up. Grace grabbed both her sisters' hands. We need to go. We need to be there when they move Mama. They ran. They ran out of that restaurant still wearing their cleaning uniforms, past the wealthy diners who watched them go, out into the street where they caught a bus to the community hospital where their mother had been slowly dying because they couldn't afford better. When they burst into their mother's room, Lin Chen was asleep. She looked so small in the hospital bed, so fragile. Her skin was gray, her breathing was shallow. And Grace felt her heart break all over again because even with Dominic's help, they might be too late. "Mama," she whispered, touching her hand. Lynn's eyes flittered open. "Girls, why aren't you at work?" "Something happened, Mama. Something good. Something impossible." They told her everything about the spilled juice, about Gerald's cruelty, about Dominic appearing like an angel, about the treatment, the scholarship, all of it. And as they talked, Lynn's eyes filled with tears. This man, he did this for strangers? He said it was because of his mother, Grace explained. She was a cleaner too. She died working, and he couldn't save her, but he could save us. Lynn closed her eyes. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. What was his mother's name? Mei Chang. Lynn went very still. Then she opened her eyes wide. Mei! Mei Chang? The sisters looked at each other, confused. You know her? I think I did. Lynn's voice was barely audible. 20 years ago, when I first came to this country, I worked at an office building downtown. There was another cleaner there, Chinese woman. So kind. She had a young son she was raising alone. We used to eat lunch together sometimes, share our struggles. Her name was May. Grace felt chills run down her spine. Mama, are you sure? She had a birthmark on her wrist, shaped like a crescent moon. She showed it to me once, said her son used to kiss it when he was little and call it her moon kiss. We can ask, Faith said. When we see Dominic again, we can ask. But they didn't have to wait. Because at that moment, Dominic walked into the room. He'd followed them to the hospital. Of course he had. He wasn't going to let them face this alone. Mrs. Chen, he said respectfully, approaching the bed, my name is Dominic Chang. I'm May's son, Lynn interrupted, her voice full of wonder. You're May's little boy? Dominic froze. You knew my mother? We worked together 20 years ago. We cleaned the same building. She talked about you constantly. How smart you were, how hard you worked in school, how you were going to be someone important someday. Lynn smiled despite her tears. She was so proud of you. Dominic's knees seemed to give out. He sank into the chair beside the bed, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. She talked about me. All the time. She said you were her reason for everything, her hope, her future. She said that one day you would change the world, and Dominic, she was right. The sisters watched this reunion, this impossible connection, and understood that this wasn't coincidence. This was the universe completing a circle. Dominic's mother had been kind to theirs 20 years ago, and now Dominic was returning that kindness to Lynn's daughters. She would be so proud of you, Lynn whispered. Not because you're rich, not because you're successful, but because you're kind, because you see people, because you use your power to help instead of hurt. That's what she always wanted for you. Dominic looked up, his face wet with tears. I miss her so much. I know, but she's not really gone. She lives in every kind thing you do, every person you help, every life you change. Lynn squeezed his hand. Thank you for saving my daughters. Thank you for being the man your mother raised you to be. The ambulance arrived then, and Dr. Patel's team carefully transferred Lynn to a private room at Memorial Hospital. The sisters rode with her, holding her hands, still unable to believe this was happening. Over the next weeks, Lynn began treatment. The aggressive therapy was brutal. She lost her hair, lost weight, spent days too weak to stand, but slowly, miraculously, the cancer began to shrink. It's responding, Dr. Patel told them after the first month. Better than I hoped. Your mother is a...
She always has been, Grace said. The sisters started college that fall. Grace in nursing school, Hope in business, Faith in education. They studied hard, earned high grades, and spent weekends and summers at Les Magnifiques learning how to run a restaurant properly. Dominic was there constantly. He taught them about business, about leadership, about treating employees like human beings instead of resources. And slowly, they stopped being his charity case and became something else. Family. 3 years later,
Lin Chan went into remission. 5 years later, the sisters graduated college with honors. And 7 years after that day in the restaurant, something incredible happened. Hope opened her own restaurant, a place called Mama's Kitchen, where the entire staff earned living wages, had health care, and treated every customer with dignity. It became the most popular restaurant in the city. Grace became head nurse at Memorial Hospital's cancer ward, treating poor patients with the same compassion she wished her mother had received earlier. Faith taught at an elementary school in the poorest part of the city, and every single one of her students learned to read because she never gave up on any of them. And Dominic? He started a foundation called the Mei Zhang Fund that helped working-class families afford education, healthcare, and housing. It changed thousands of lives. But the best part, the part that made everything worth it, came 10 years after that day in the restaurant. Lin Chen, now cancer-free and healthy, stood in Les Magnifiques for the first time as a guest, instead of a cleaner. Dominic had invited her and her daughters for a special dinner. As they ate together, Dominic, Lin, Grace, Hope, and Faith, Lin looked around the restaurant where her daughters had almost been destroyed, where they'd been saved instead. May would be so happy, she said quietly, to know that her son saved my daughters, to know that our friendship 20 years ago led to this. Dominic raised his glass to mothers who sacrifice everything, and to daughters who make those sacrifices worthwhile. They all drank, and in that moment, Grace understood something profound. Kindness multiplies, compassion spreads, and one person choosing to stand up, one person refusing to look away from suffering, can change the entire world. All it takes is courage. All it takes is someone willing to say stop when everyone else stays silent. All it takes is remembering that every person you meet is someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's beloved child who deserves dignity. That night in Les Magnifiques, 10 years after the worst day of their lives became the best day, the Chen sisters and Dominic Zhang made a promise. They would spend the rest of their lives standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. They would use their success to lift others up. They would never forget where they came from or who they used to be. And they would make sure that no one, ever again, would be forced to their knees for someone else's entertainment. That was their promise to Mei Zhang. That was their promise to each other. And that was their promise to the world. Because sometimes the worst moment of your life is actually the beginning of everything good. Sometimes when you're on your knees about to break, that's when angels appear. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe sends exactly the right person at exactly the right time to whisper the word that changes everything. Stop.